Make sure to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. The air had a strange stillness that afternoon, the kind that made the trees stop swaying and the birds fall silent. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something big, the pause before a storm, before something changes. I stood at the kitchen sink, slowly rinsing a mug I'd already washed twice, my eyes fixed on the sky through the window. What had started as a soft gray had deepened into something darker, more urgent. The clouds were heavy, low, like they were pressing down on the whole neighborhood. My little house sat at the end of a quiet street, the kind where you know everyone by name, even if you don't know their story. Across the road, I saw my neighbor, Tom, moving across his porch. He was tightening something on the side of the railing, probably trying to secure it before the storm hit full force. His movements were steady, efficient. There was something about the way he moved, the way he never rushed, that always struck me as private. Not cold, not rude. Just guarded. Tom had lived in that house for about 2 years. He kept to himself mostly. Early morning runs, quiet evenings on his back patio. We spoke occasionally, weather, property lines, the shared annoyance of mail delivered to the wrong house, but nothing deeper. I hadn't really thought much about it. Until now. He glanced up briefly and caught me watching. I waved without thinking, a quick flick of my fingers, casual. He nodded in return and went back to work. The wind picked up suddenly, slamming a loose branch against the side of the house. I jumped, dropping the mug back into the sink. The clatter sounded louder than it should have. I dried my hands on a dish towel, moving through the house to check the windows. I wasn't scared, exactly. Just alert. The kind of alert that settles in your chest and doesn't go away. By 5 o'clock, the first heavy drops of rain had begun to fall, and the trees bent low with the force of the wind. The power flickered once. Then again. And then it went out completely. I stood in the dim hush of the living room, waiting to see if it would return. When it didn't, I lit a few candles and tried to steady my breath. Storms weren't new. I'd been through plenty before. But this one, it felt different. Bigger. Closer. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, just in case, and sat on the edge of the couch. The quiet outside was now broken by the low, angry growl of thunder and the rhythmic pounding of rain on the roof. Then came the knock. It was soft, barely audible over the storm. I froze. Another knock, this one louder. I rose slowly, heart ticking a little faster with every step toward the door. I opened it only a crack at first. Tom stood there, drenched from head to toe, rainwater dripping from his dark hair onto the porch boards. His jacket was soaked through, clinging to his frame. He looked like someone who hadn't planned to be there, and yet had nowhere else to go. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, breath visible in the cold air. "My house. Something's wrong with the back roof. Water's coming in faster than I can stop it. The breaker's out. I didn't know where else." His words trailed off, and for a moment we just stood there, two neighbors, barely more than strangers, facing each other in the doorway while the storm roared behind him. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He hesitated only a second before nodding and ducking inside. The moment the door shut behind him, the world outside was gone, replaced by dim candlelight, the warmth of the room, and the sudden, unfamiliar presence of another person in my space. Tom stood near the door, dripping and uncertain. I handed him a towel without saying anything. He took it with a quiet, "Thanks," and began drying his face and hands. I watched him, unsure of what to say, unsure of what this was. A temporary accident? An unexpected turn? Or the beginning of something neither of us had seen coming? Outside, the storm howled. But inside, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. Tom didn't say much after he stepped inside, just quietly took the towel and nodded his thanks again as he rubbed the rain from his face. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering glow of 3 candles I had grouped on the coffee table. The storm still raged outside, thunder rolling low and steady like something alive. Rain hammered against the windows, and somewhere down the block, a trash can clattered to the curb. "Sorry again," he said finally, voice low, still a little breathless. "I didn't mean to barge in like this." You didn't, I replied. You did the right thing. He looked around slowly, his eyes adjusting to the warm darkness of my living room. I wasn't sure where else to go. The water was pouring in through the back wall. I tried to stop it, but then the power went and… I don't know. I just panicked, I guess. The way he said it surprised me. I hadn't expected someone like him, calm, measured, to admit to panic. I could still see droplets of water clinging to his eyelashes, and his soaked t-shirt was beginning to cling awkwardly beneath his half-zipped jacket. You need dry clothes, I said, already turning toward the hallway. I'll find something. I dug through the bottom drawer in the guest room where I kept some of my brother's old clothes. A worn hoodie, soft with age, and a pair of sweatpants I hadn't looked at in years. When I returned, Tom had taken off his wet jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. His shirt was still clinging to him, and I averted my eyes instinctively, pretending not to notice the lean shape of his shoulders under the damp fabric. Here, I said, holding out the clothes. They might be a little big, but they're warm. He took them, giving me a tight, grateful smile. Thank you. Really? I gestured to the bathroom, down the hall on the left. While he changed, I moved back into the living room and adjusted the candles, trying to calm the nervous energy in my hands. Something about having him here, unexpected, vulnerable, had unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I had always thought of Tom as a quiet fixture on the street, a presence more than a person. But now, standing barefoot in my living room with the storm outside, and him somewhere down the hall, everything felt close. Immediate. When he returned, the change was subtle but striking. The hoodie fit him loosely, sleeves pushed up to his forearms, the sweatpants bunched slightly at his ankles. His hair was still damp, and he was holding his wet clothes folded over one arm. I didn't know where to put these, he said quietly. Here, I'll throw them in the dryer, I offered, taking them from him. If the power comes back, they'll be ready. He hesitated for a moment before settling onto the edge of the couch, his hands resting in his lap. I dropped the clothes into the dryer, knowing full well it wouldn't start, and returned with 2 mugs of tea. One for him, one for me. We sat across from each other, the silence growing soft around us. It wasn't uncomfortable, just new, careful. I don't really know much about you, I said finally, wrapping my hands around the mug. Aside from your impressive ability to maintain a lawn. He smiled. A real one this time. It lit his face in a way I hadn't seen before. There's not much to know. I work too much. I'm not great at small talk. And apparently, I'm terrible at preparing for storms. That's a solid start, I said, smiling back. He looked at me then, his expression a little more serious. You've always seemed steady. The kind of person who has everything under control. I let out a small laugh. If you only knew. Tell me then, he said, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees. What don't I know? The question caught me off guard, not because it was invasive but because it felt genuine. Curious, not prying. I hesitated, then said, I used to be married. A long time ago. Haven't dated much since. I guess I got comfortable being on my own. Tom nodded, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Me too. Divorced 3 years ago. Moved here to start over. The air shifted again, gentler now, like the worst of the storm had passed both outside and in. Starting over's harder than people think, I murmured. He looked at me, holding my gaze. Unless someone makes it easier. The words settled between us, unexpected and heavier than the space they took up. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The storm outside had calmed slightly, rain still falling but softer now. More like a whisper than a scream. Eventually, Tom leaned back into the cushions. This couch might be the most comfortable thing I've sat on in weeks. I laughed, grateful for the change in tone. Well, if you end up stuck here, I have blankets. He raised an eyebrow. Are you offering to let me stay the night? I'm offering to not send you back into a flood. He chuckled. Fair. As the candlelight flickered against the walls and the storm slowly faded into the background, I realized I hadn't felt this kind of stillness in a long time. Not the quiet that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being seen. And as strange as it felt good. Tom eventually stretched out on the couch, one arm behind his head, the other draped loosely across his stomach. His expression was relaxed now, softened by the warmth of dry clothes and candlelight. He looked different somehow, not like the man I waved at from across the street, but someone closer, realer. Someone who had stepped out from behind the edges of polite neighborliness and into something more human. I sat across from him in the armchair, legs curled underneath me, still holding my tea though it had long gone cold. The storm had quieted into a steady drizzle, the kind that tapped gently at the windows like an old song you half remembered. The wind no longer screamed. It whispered. And in the hush that followed, something settled in me. Something that felt like permission to breathe. "You always this calm during a blackout?" he asked, breaking the silence with a small, amused smile. "Only when there's company," I replied. "Otherwise, I tend to pace." He smirked. "Good thing I flooded my house then." I laughed before I could stop myself. "Is that your way of saying I should be thanking you?" "Well," he said, feigning a thoughtful tone, "if it brought us to this very civilized tea and candle moment, I'd say it worked out." I smiled but looked away, a little unsure of what to do with the way his words warmed something beneath my ribs. "I'm not used to this," I said, more to the room than to him. He sat up slightly. "This? Talking. Letting someone in." I hesitated. Being in this kind of space with someone else. He didn't respond right away. Then he nodded slowly, his voice quieter. "Me neither." We were both quiet again, but this time the silence felt fuller, layered with things we weren't yet ready to name. My eyes wandered toward the window, where drops slid slowly down the glass, lit orange by the nearest streetlight. There was a softness to the moment that felt borrowed, like it didn't belong to real life, but to some pocket of time outside of it. "I used to be afraid of nights like this," I said after a while. Tom turned toward me, waiting. "When the power goes out, the dark, the silence. It felt like everything was closing in. But now, I don't know. It doesn't feel so lonely." He looked at me in a way that made my pulse quicken, not because it was romantic or intense, but because it was quiet and present.
He was really seeing me.
Not just looking.
Seeing.
"I get that," he said, his voice a little rough. "There's something about sitting across from someone and just not having to pretend." I met his eyes again. "Exactly." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "My ex and we spent so long being polite to each other. You know what I mean? Smiling, moving through routines, avoiding the real stuff until there was nothing left but the shell of what we used to be." I nodded, the truth of his words landing deep. "I think I did that too. With my ex. By the time I realized I wasn't happy, I didn't even remember what joy had felt like." He glanced at the floor for a second, then back at me. "Do you remember now?" His question caught me off guard. Not because of what he asked, but because I didn't know the answer. "I think," I said carefully, "I'm starting to." Tom's smile was faint but warm, the kind that said he wasn't looking for more than honesty. The power didn't come back on. The wind rattled the windows once, maybe twice more. But everything inside the house had stilled. There was no need to fill the space with more talk. We'd said enough. Eventually, I stood and pulled a folded quilt from the basket by the fireplace. "Here," I said, handing it to him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Yes," I replied, softer than before. "You're not a guest anymore." He didn't ask what I meant. He just took the quilt, nodded once, and settled back onto the couch. As I turned off the last candle and made my way to bed, I felt something trail behind me, something not quite visible, but real. Something that felt like the end of one kind of storm and the beginning of something entirely different. The morning came slowly, as if the world was unsure whether it should wake. A pale gray light filtered in through the curtains, soft and uncertain. My eyes opened to the quiet hum of stillness, the kind that follows a long night of wind and rain. I lay there for a moment, blinking at the ceiling, wrapped in the warmth of my blankets, listening. It was silent. No distant thunder. No wind rattling the windows. Just the subtle creaks of a settling house and the low tick of the kitchen clock down the hall. Then I remembered.
Tom.
I sat up, heart thudding gently. Not from fear or alarm, but something else. Something like anticipation. Pulling on my robe, I padded barefoot down the hall, careful not to make too much noise. As I neared the living room, I slowed, unsure of what I'd find. Would he still be asleep? Would he already be gone? But he was there, curled on the couch beneath the quilt I'd given him, one arm tucked under his head, his chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm of sleep. The candle we'd left burning on the side table had long since gone out, leaving only the faint scent of wax and burnt wick behind. His face, usually guarded and composed, looked softer in the early light, unguarded, peaceful, almost boyish. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I should have, watching him. Then I slipped into the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. The power had come back sometime during the night. The refrigerator hummed faintly. The digital clock on the stove blinked 4:17 a.m., then adjusted itself to 7:22. Everything was slowly falling back into place. By the time the coffee brewed and the smell had begun to drift into the rest of the house, I heard him stir. "Morning," I said softly, turning just as he appeared in the doorway. His hair was tousled, his voice still rough from sleep.
Hey.
"Sorry, I didn't mean to crash that hard." I smiled, pouring 2 mugs. "You needed it. I haven't seen anyone sleep through a power surge before." He chuckled quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I felt safe." His words made me pause for a second. They weren't flirtatious, not even pointed, just honest. But they made something tighten gently in my chest. I handed him a cup, and we stood in the kitchen together, sipping slowly, letting the moment settle between us. Outside, the sky was still overcast, but the rain had stopped. Puddles shimmered in the driveway, reflecting branches and bits of broken cloud. The street was quiet, peaceful. "You want some breakfast?" I asked, half hoping he'd say yes, half afraid that he wouldn't. He looked around the kitchen, the subtle smile still lingering at the corners of his mouth. "You cook too?" "Don't sound so surprised," I said, raising an eyebrow. "No, I just figured someone as independent as you probably lived off of toast and stubbornness." I laughed. "Well, you're not wrong. But I make a mean omelet when I'm in the mood." "In that case," he stepped back, one hand over his heart. "I'd be honored." I cracked eggs into a bowl while he leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee and watching me. We talked about normal things. The damage the storm had done. The mess he'd probably find waiting for him at his place. Whether or not the town would fix the potholes before the next rain. But beneath it all, there was something quieter moving between us. Something wordless. Not quite tension. Not yet anything romantic. Just awareness. Every now and then, our eyes would meet, and neither of us would look away too quickly. And each time, my heart beat just a little faster. When breakfast was ready, we sat at the table like old friends, comfortable, easy. I caught myself smiling at how natural it felt, how he didn't seem like my neighbor Tom anymore, but someone I'd known longer than I could explain. As we finished, he set his fork down and glanced toward the window. "Looks like it's clearing up." "Looks like," I echoed, unsure why it made me feel a little hollow. He stood slowly stretching. "I should probably go check the damage. Make sure the house hasn't floated away." I nodded, trying not to let disappointment show.
Yeah.
"I imagine it's a mess." He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. Then he turned, eyes meeting mine. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was low, sincere. "Not just for the couch. Or the sweatshirt. But for not making me feel like a burden." "You weren't," I said simply. "You were welcome." He nodded once, lingering a second longer. "Can I come by again? Sometime? I mean, even without a storm?" My chest warmed. "I think I'd like that." He smiled, that quiet, crooked smile I was beginning to recognize. And then he stepped out into the light drizzle, the door closing gently behind him. I stood in the silence that followed, alone in my kitchen again. But something felt different now. Lighter.
Softer.
Not empty, but open. Like the storm had taken something with it, and maybe, just maybe, left something better behind. The rest of the day passed in a way that felt almost too normal, like the storm had never happened. The clouds slowly cleared, leaving behind puddles that shimmered with reflected sky. The street filled with the usual post-storm routines, neighbors sweeping sidewalks, dragging soggy branches to the curb, and shaking their heads at the damage.
But something in me had changed.
I moved through my house with a sense of quiet awareness, as if the walls themselves had shifted in the night. The couch where Tom had slept still held the faintest indentation, the blanket still folded neatly on the armrest. His mug sat rinsed beside the sink. It was such a small thing, just a mug, but it felt like a reminder of something significant. Something real. Later that afternoon, I walked to the mailbox in bare feet, just to feel the damp earth beneath me. The air was warm, the sun beginning to return, and birds were already reclaiming the silence with cautious song. As I crossed the yard, I glanced toward Tom's house. His truck was in the driveway, the driver's side door wide open. He stood by the porch with a shovel in hand, clearing out debris that had washed up against the foundation. His shirt was slightly damp with sweat, and he moved with quiet determination. He looked up just as I reached the edge of my yard. Our eyes met. He smiled. It was the kind of smile you don't give to a stranger or even just a neighbor. It held memory, familiarity, and maybe something more. "Looks like you've got your work cut out for you," I called out, trying to keep my voice light. He laughed. "You're not wrong." "I've got coffee," I added, surprising even myself. "If you want a break." Tom hesitated just long enough for me to feel nervous, then wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Actually, yeah, that sounds great." I turned and walked back toward my house, heart fluttering the way it hadn't in years. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because of how easy it all felt. How easy he said yes. Minutes later, he was standing in my kitchen again. Not soaked from rain this time, not carrying chaos behind him, just quiet gratitude and tired limbs. I handed him a fresh mug, and we leaned against the counter, sipping in silence. "How bad was it?" I asked after a moment. He shrugged. "Basement's wet, but not ruined. A couple of leaks in the back wall, but nothing I can't patch. Honestly, I've been through worse." I nodded, watching him over the rim of my cup. "You seem calmer today." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." There was a long pause after that. Not tense, just full. "I keep thinking about last night," I said softly, unsure why I felt the need to say it out loud. How strange it was, but also how right it felt. Tom didn't look away. "You're not the only one." We stood in the warmth of my kitchen, the world outside slowly drying, healing. Inside, something similar was happening.
Slowly.
Quietly. "I don't want to rush anything," he said after a moment. "And I don't want to assume. But if there's something here, something worth exploring, I'd like to try." His words landed gently, but firmly. They didn't ask. They didn't push. They offered. I took a breath. The kind that fills your lungs fully, deeply, like exhaling a version of yourself you didn't know you'd been holding in. "I think I'd like that too," I said. He smiled, and this time, it reached all the way to his eyes. We finished our coffee without needing to say more. Because something had shifted. Something small but certain. And maybe it wasn't love, not yet. But it was something. And it was real. The days that followed carried a new kind of rhythm, one I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a whirlwind. There were no grand gestures, no declarations. Just quiet moments. Subtle changes. The kind you only notice when you've lived long enough without them. Tom didn't knock on my door every day.
He didn't need to.
Sometimes I'd glance out my window and see him mowing his lawn, or carrying groceries inside, or sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, and we'd exchange a wave. But it was the kind of wave that held a question now. Or maybe an invitation. Other times he'd show up unannounced, but not unexpectedly. Like on Tuesday, when he brought over leftover pasta he'd made too much of, or Friday afternoon, when he offered to help trim the overgrown hedges in my backyard. I told him he didn't have to. He said he knew.
And stayed anyway.
That Friday evening, after we cleaned up and he was about to leave, he paused in my kitchen, hand resting on the back of the chair he hadn't quite pulled out. The golden hour light streamed in through the window, turning everything soft and slow. "I like this," he said. I looked up from rinsing the glasses.
What?
He shrugged slightly, a half-smile forming. "This, whatever this is. The quiet."
You.
I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned off the faucet and dried my hands, letting his words settle. "I like it too," I said finally, "even if I don't totally know what to call it yet." "You don't have to call it anything," he said. "Not if it makes it feel smaller." That line stayed with me long after he left. That night, I sat on my porch alone, blanket over my legs, a mug of tea warming my palms. The air smelled like summer and fresh-cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and wind chimes danced on a breeze I hadn't noticed until then. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I wasn't mourning what had been lost, or bracing for what could go wrong. I was just here, and it was enough. The next morning, Tom texted, "You up? Want to meet me at the market?" It was a simple message, but it lit something inside me. Not just excitement, but a soft confidence, like I could say yes to something new without losing who I'd been before. So I said yes. We met under the striped awning at the local farmer's market. The place was buzzing with weekend energy, people weaving through stalls, voices rising and falling over the scent of fresh bread and tomatoes warmed by the sun. Tom handed me a coffee the moment I approached. Black. No sugar, right? I blinked, surprised. "How did you?" "You made it like that the morning after the storm." I smiled. "You remember that?" He gave me a look. I remember everything about that night. We walked slowly through the rows of produce, stopping to admire baskets of strawberries and jars of honey. At one point, I picked up a small potted herb and held it out to him. "Basil," I said, "for your windowsill." He looked at it, then at me. "Will you come help me keep it alive?" I laughed, handing it to him.
Deal.
That afternoon, he did come by. We made sandwiches from the things we bought, thick slices of bread, tomatoes still warm from the sun, a smear of homemade pesto from a jar we'd split. We ate in my backyard, shoes kicked off in the grass. He sat beside me, legs stretched out, and for a long time, we didn't talk. We didn't need to. I leaned my head lightly against his shoulder, and he didn't move away. And that was it. No fireworks. No sweeping score. Just two people who had survived their own storms, learning how to sit in the sun again, together. By the time the following week rolled around, something between us had quietly rooted itself. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't require declarations or questions. It just was. A rhythm we had fallen into without even realizing. Tom would text me in the mornings sometimes, simple things. "Coffee? Sunset walk." I made extra. "Hungry?" And more often than not, I'd say yes. Sometimes we didn't even make plans. He'd show up on my porch just as I was finishing a book or closing my laptop, and we'd fall into conversation the way some people fall into sleep, naturally, without effort. We still hadn't talked about what we were, not in the way people often do. There was no need to label something that didn't feel confused. But that Thursday evening, something shifted. He came by after dinner, holding 2 bowls of peach cobbler in his hands like a peace offering. "Still warm," he said with a sheepish grin. We sat on the porch swing with our bowls, the air thick with late summer sweetness and the scent of cut grass still lingering from earlier in the day. Cicadas hummed in the background, and above us, the sky blushed pink and gold. "Have you always been this quiet?" I asked, the question slipping out as I nudged him with my knee. Tom chuckled, spoon hovering near his mouth. "Probably. I've always thought too much. Less risk that way." "Risk of what?" He hesitated, then set his bowl aside. "Of getting too close. Of needing something I couldn't ask for." His honesty sat between us, gentle but raw. I looked at him, really looked. "You know you can ask me. For anything." He turned his head slowly, meeting my eyes. There was something in his expression, uncertainty, maybe, or fear. But layered beneath that was something deeper. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. "I know," he said quietly. "That's what scares me." I didn't say anything right away. The swing creaked beneath us, and somewhere down the street, wind rustled the trees. "I'm scared too," I said. "Not of you. Of how easily this feels like home." He exhaled, and the sound was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "That's it, isn't it? When you finally let your guard down, and it doesn't hurt, it just feels like breathing again." We sat in that, the kind of silence you don't need to fill. Then, slowly, he reached for my hand. Not boldly, not possessively, just a simple gesture. Honest and warm. Our fingers slid together like they had done it 100 times before. "I used to think I'd always be alone," I whispered. "And I was okay with that most days.
But now."
He waited, thumb brushing against mine. "Now I wonder if I settled for loneliness because I didn't know what stillness with someone else could feel like." He didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. Instead, he leaned in, just enough for our foreheads to touch, his breath mingling with mine. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. Just a quiet meeting in the middle. A pause. A promise. When we finally pulled back, the sun had dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. We stayed on the porch until it got dark, fingers still laced, talking about nothing, until even the nothing felt like everything. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was watching my life from the outside. I was in it, with him. The next morning arrived with that soft, golden light that only comes after a string of summer storms, warm, forgiving, and filled with the promise of something new. I opened my eyes to the sound of birdsong and the gentle hum of the ceiling fan above me. For a moment, I lay there in stillness, letting the quiet settle over me like a blanket. It felt like peace. And then I remembered.
Tom.
The night before. His hand in mine. The closeness. The quiet. The understanding that had passed between us without the need for explanation. It had been weeks, maybe months, since the first storm brought him to my door, but in the soft silence of that morning, it felt like a lifetime had passed between then and now. I got up, brewed coffee, and moved through my kitchen with ease. The window over the sink was open just enough to let in the breeze, and the scent of early summer, damp earth, cut grass, warm pavement, drifted in with it. I was halfway through my first cup when I heard the gentle knock at the door. I didn't rush. I didn't even feel surprised. I knew it would be him. When I opened the door, Tom stood there, holding a small box in his hands. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a dream, barefoot, hair a little messy, wearing a soft t-shirt and jeans. His smile was quiet, like it had been waiting all night for this exact moment.
"Morning," he said.
"Morning," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. He held up the box. "Biscuits. I baked them. Sort of. From a can." I laughed. "Fancy. I figured I owed you breakfast. For all of it." I stepped aside to let him in. "You don't owe me anything." He paused in the entryway. "Can I sit?" "You never have to ask." He moved to the kitchen table while I got plates and poured more coffee. Everything about it felt so natural, so quietly familiar, that I had to stop for a moment and breathe it in. This was no longer about a chance storm or the fragile connection that comes in the aftermath of chaos. This was something steadier. Intentional. We sat across from each other, biscuits steaming between us, and for a while, we didn't talk. Just the sound of spoons clinking, coffee being sipped, soft laughter at how overbaked the bottoms of the biscuits were. It was domestic. It was easy. Then he set his fork down and looked at me. "I'm not great with words," he said, voice low. "But I think I want to try something. I want to see what this could be. You and me." My heart fluttered, not with nerves, but with recognition. Because I'd already felt the same. "I want that too," I said softly. "But let's not rush. Let's build it. Let's do it slowly." He nodded, a smile forming, gentle and sure. "Slow works for me." After breakfast, we took a walk through the neighborhood. The storm's damage had been cleared. Sidewalks were clean again. The world had moved on, But somehow, we hadn't just moved on. We'd moved forward. When we returned to my house, we stood under the small awning by the porch. He looked at me for a long moment, then brushed a piece of hair from my cheek. And finally, he kissed me. It was unhurried.
Warm. Certain.
Like every unspoken moment between us had been waiting for this one. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "No more storms," he whispered. "Just the quiet after," I replied. That night, I sat alone on the porch, the same place I had watched the wind howl and the sky fall apart not so long ago. But now, the silence around me wasn't heavy. It was full. Full of what had been, what could be, and what already was. Tom hadn't stayed the night. He didn't need to, because I knew he would be back. Because I knew, this time, I wasn't waiting for something to arrive. I was building something that was already here. Not because of the storm, but because of what it revealed. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt ready.